So here's the thing about watering your garden from the surface. It's not as straightforward as most folks think. Surface watering can actually do more harm than good, especially over time. You might notice your plants looking fine for a bit, but the truth is, shallow watering leads to weak roots and stressed out plants. It's a common mistake, but one that's easy to fix once you know what's really going on. If you're watering your garden every day, or even every week, you're not solving the problem, you're creating it. The more you water shallow soil, the weaker your plants become. That's the part most gardeners don't realize. Constant watering trains roots to stay near the surface, where heat, evaporation, and nutrient loss are at their worst. And that leads to the cycle most people are stuck in: dry soil, stressed plants, more watering, and still disappointing yields. Before we go deeper, there's one small habit that made this entire system work for me long term. I started managing my organic waste properly using a simple indoor bin, the Epica countertop compost bin. It keeps kitchen scraps odor-free and ready to use, which matters more than people think. Most gardeners don't fail because they lack knowledge. They fail because they don't have consistent organic input. That bin removes that friction completely. I'll leave the exact one I use in the description if you want to check it out. Now here's where things shift, what the Romans understood about water that modern gardeners ignore. So, let's talk about some ancient wisdom, particularly the use of olla irrigation. For, well, thousands of years, gardeners in arid regions have relied on unglazed clay pots buried in the soil. These ollas slowly release water right at the roots, reducing waste and, honestly, making the most of every drop. It's a simple idea, but, it's surprisingly effective even today. There's a method used for centuries, often traced back to Roman and ancient dryland farming systems, that allows plants to grow with little to no additional watering once established. So, it's called olla irrigation, but, not the decorative version you might see online. The real system is deeper, more deliberate, and honestly, far more effective. Instead of watering the soil from above, you actually bury a porous clay pot underground, fill it with water, and then just let the soil pull moisture out slowly as needed. No surface evaporation, no runoff, no waste. Water moves only when the soil demands it. That single principle, well, it changes everything about how plants access moisture. When you water from above, most of that water never benefits the plant the way you think it does. A large portion evaporates before it even penetrates deeply. Another portion spreads unevenly, encouraging roots to grow sideways instead of downward. And, in hot conditions, the top few inches dry out quickly, creating constant stress cycles. Over the years, I've put these watering methods to the test, and the results are pretty telling. Time and again, I've seen that plants watered from the surface just don't develop the deep, healthy roots you want. The soil dries out faster and, well, you end up watering more often just to keep things alive. It's not the most efficient way to help your plants thrive, honestly. I've tested this across multiple systems, raised beds, in-ground plots, even container gardens. The pattern is consistent. Surface watering creates dependency. Plants become reliant on you. But when water is delivered below the surface, roots behave differently. They grow deeper, stronger, and more resilient, and that's exactly what the Roman system takes advantage of. Here's the part that most people underestimate. A buried clay pot doesn't release water like a drip system. It releases it based on pressure differences between the soil and the water inside the pot. When the surrounding soil dries out, it pulls moisture through the porous walls. When the soil is already moist, the flow slows down. That means the plant is essentially controlling its own water supply. All right, let's talk about setting things up in a practical way. And, some of the most common mistakes folks make, it's easy to think you can just bury an olla anywhere and call it a day, but there's a bit more to it. People often underestimate the importance of depth, or they might place the olla too far from the plants that need it most. Sometimes folks forget to check for leaks, or they use pots that aren't porous enough. So really, taking the time to set things up properly at the start can save you a lot of frustration down the line. In one of my test beds, I buried a standard olla about 10 inches deep between tomato plants. I filled it once, then left it. For days, nothing looked different. Then the heat picked up. The surface-watered plants started showing stress, slight wilting, slower growth, but the ones connected to the olla system stayed stable, leaves stayed firm, growth didn't slow down, and here's the part that surprised me, I used significantly less water overall. If you just bury a pot and expect results, you'll be disappointed. Placement matters, depth matters, spacing matters. The sweet spot I've found is burying the olla so the neck sits just above soil level, with the main body about 8 to 12 inches deep. That puts the water exactly where roots are actively growing. Spacing really depends on the crop, For tomatoes or other larger plants, one olla can support about a 2 to 3 foot radius. Now, if you're growing smaller crops like lettuce or herbs, you can space them a bit closer together or even use smaller pots. And here's a detail most folks tend to skip. Soil preparation around the olla is just as important. So, to get the most out of your olla system, it's important to match the size of the vessel and the spacing to the needs of your plants. Take a little extra time to prepare your soil and keep an eye on moisture levels. With a bit of planning, you'll find ollas can make your garden more efficient and a whole lot easier to manage. If your soil is compacted or it's low in organic matter, water movement is going to be limited. That's where your compost really comes in handy. Not just on the surface, but mixed right into the root zone. That's why having a steady supply of organic material really matters. It improves soil structure, letting moisture move evenly instead of getting trapped or just lost. The idea of zero watering might sound a bit exaggerated, but under the right conditions, it's actually very real. When you combine deep moisture delivery with proper soil structure and mulching, the whole system becomes incredibly efficient. The buried pot reduces evaporation, the soil holds moisture longer, and the mulch prevents surface loss. All three of these work together, really. In one of my beds, during a mild season, I filled the olla and honestly didn't need to refill it for over a week. In cooler conditions, it lasted even longer. Now, 60 years without watering isn't about never adding water. It's about creating a system where natural rainfall and soil storage handle most of the work. That's really the principle behind it. This is where people often fail, and honestly, it's not always obvious. They keep watering from the top. If you're using an olla system and still watering the surface regularly, you're actually defeating the purpose. You're training roots to stay shallow again. You have to commit to the system. Let the soil dry slightly at the top. That encourages roots to seek moisture deeper down. That's how you build resilience. Why this works better than drip irrigation in many cases. Drip irrigation is efficient compared to sprinklers, but it still delivers water on a schedule, not based on actual soil demand. Olla irrigation is demand-driven. That's the key difference. There's no timer, no guesswork, no overwatering. The plant and soil regulate the system naturally. In my experience, this leads to fewer disease issues as well, because the surface stays drier. That reduces fungal problems, especially in dense plantings. In backyard gardens, this is one of the simplest upgrades you can make. Dig, place, fill, and you're done. In raised beds, it works surprisingly well, especially if you combine it with deeper soil layers and organic matter below. In containers, Smaller ollas can be incredibly effective, particularly for crops that dry out quickly. Even in hydroponic-style setups using soil-based media, the principle of delivering moisture below the surface can improve root behavior. The concept stays the same: control where the water goes and the plant will adapt. This isn't just about watering, it's about understanding how plants interact with soil. Most modern advice focuses on adding more water, more fertilizer, more inputs, but real efficiency comes from placement and timing. The Romans didn't have modern irrigation systems. They designed around limitations, and in doing so, created systems that worked with nature instead of against it. That's what makes this method so powerful even today. If your garden feels like it constantly needs attention, watering, adjusting, fixing, it's not because gardening is hard, it's because the system isn't optimized. Olla irrigation changes that by shifting control back to the soil and the plant. And when you combine that with consistent organic inputs, managed properly, so your soil structure keeps improving, you create a system that becomes easier over time, not harder.
That's the difference between maintaining a garden and building one that sustains itself. If you want more practical, tested methods like this, the kind that actually work beyond theory, subscribe to Fam Logic and share this with someone who's serious about growing real food. Because once you understand how water, soil and roots actually interact, everything in your garden starts working with you instead of against you.